Hey, my name is Pearl. I am 15 years old. The story I want to tell you began long before I was born. This is a romantic story in its own peculiar way. A story that could touch the strings of my heart or bring sadness to me if I had just read about it in a book. Because a story that sounds touching and exciting can still ruin the lives of many people in reality. Well, I'll play with open cards from the very beginning. I will devote most of my story to my father. And this is not because I love him so much. A few months ago, he left me, my mom, my sister, and my brother. And I'm so mad at him. It all started when our family moved to a new home. Several generations of my dad's family had lived here before us in this old house. Of course, accumulating a vast amount of unnecessary things that my dad simply did not dare to throw away. And, of course, all these things were packed in various boxes, which, upon arrival, needed repacking, waiting to be sorted literally everywhere. And repacking them was my task. My brother Joseph, who is 1 year younger than me, was my helper. So, as you can guess, I worked basically alone. To find at least some pleasure in this boring and dusty work, I not only sorted and packed the old stuff, but I also tried to find something interesting there. Most of the time, there was nothing of interest in these boxes, but finally I found an old notebook in a hardcover. It was not signed and contained some jerky and incoherent handwritten notes. Of course, I decided that it was somebody's diary, and of course, I wanted to read it. Doesn't everybody do that? But sorting out these notes was an even more difficult task than sorting out the boxes. At some point, I realized that it was my dad's handwriting. This only made me even more curious. But not because I wanted to read my dad's diary. You see, when he was young, my dad dreamed of becoming a writer. Dad had always had this big thing about literature. He even named all of us, his children, in honor of Nobel Prize winners for literature. In general, looking at these notes, I decided that this was not a diary, but some outlines for a future or never-written book, and I curiously buried myself in these handwritten pages. The whole text was written from the main character's point of view, and that's why at first I thought it was a diary, and it was about a relationship with a girl named Frances. At first it was a completely prosperous and happy relationship of what seemed to be two high school students, but then everything collapsed due to a chain of coincidences. Frances's parents got divorced, and Frances's mother, who was a Canadian citizen, took her daughter back with her to her homeland. The main character of the story lived in the USA, and for some reason could not go after his beloved girlfriend. Then the text went on, regarding some close friends of Frances who for some reason didn't like the main character of the story. And I did not really understand what happened next. But I was wondering what happened at the end of this story. So I decided to take the notebook, approach my dad, and honestly, admitting that I had read his notes, ask him about what happened to the main character, to Frances, and to her friends. Dad was very surprised at what I'd found, and seemed a little embarrassed because I had read it. As he told me, it was neither a diary nor a collection of literary sketches, but something in between. Frances was a girl who existed in reality, and moreover, she was my dad's first love. But Dad was really just trying to express his feelings from a difficult breakup with his girlfriend on paper and make an essay about it. He asked me if this story was really interesting, and of course, I said that I liked it a lot. Then Dad fetched another one of the boxes from the storage room and pulled out a rewritable CD from in there. He said that the story was not finished on paper because later he bought a computer and tried to finish it with the help of this new technology. He even scanned several photographs of this Frances. I continued to read the story, and now it was much easier to read. I also looked at Frances's photographs. She was a pretty girl, but there was something about her that I didn't like. Maybe it was her smile. In general, it looked like something was wrong with her, like she was somehow unpleasant to me. And as for my dad's relationship with Frances, it was really destroyed by this new circle of friends she had made in Canada. Well, not exactly new. Her childhood friend, Nadine, lived in the city Frances had left for. Nadine, for some reason, disliked my dad and did her best to ruin their relationship in every possible way. She convinced Frances to choose a college in Canada and not in the USA so that she would not leave Canada. Nadine introduced Frances to her own circle of friends, a rather large and closed gang that left Frances with almost no time to communicate with my dad. And when he finally came to Canada, they showed him directly that he was unwelcome there. And Frances felt completely under the charm and influence of these people and did not even try to resist them. Dad noticed that his girlfriend was changing more and more, and not for the better. On his last trip to Canada, Nadine explicitly told my dad that Frances had already started a relationship with a guy from their circle, and that he had better leave her alone. Then my dad retreated, although he still loved Frances very much. Of course, I could not fully sympathize with my dad's story, because if he had stayed with this Frances, he would not have met my mother, would not have married her, and neither I nor my siblings would have been born. But still, the romantic story of his first love touched me. I thought that I wouldn't mind and even would probably love to watch a movie with the main characters resembling my young dad and Frances. Oh, if only I knew. I am 15 years old, and although I already consider myself pretty mature, of course, I can't really relate to the ups and downs of relationships between 40-year-old people. And of course, for a pretty long time, I did not even pay attention to the fact that Dad had begun to work much longer hours, or that he completely stopped spending the weekends with us, his family. Mom did not comment on what was happening, so I could only guess that something had gone wrong in their relationship. But after one incident, even if I were a blind person, I would have opened my eyes wider. It was his day off. I realized from the early morning that Dad was going somewhere. He put on a beautiful new shirt, expensive cufflinks, and used a cologne that he only used for meetings with important business partners. Mom sat in the kitchen and pretended not to notice that her husband was preparing for a meeting she knew nothing about on his day off. But my little sister Alice could not stay silent forever. She was only 6 years old, so she approached our dad and with childlike simplicity took his hand and asked where he was going again. Dad seemed almost shocked, but muttered something and rather sharply pulled his hand out of his little girl's palms and left the house. And Alice, who of course did not hear anything, burst into tears with resentment and grief. But even his youngest daughter's tears did not stop our dad. He left the house, got into his car, and drove away. Alice continued to cry, but for some reason our mother did not leave the kitchen. It was as if she was not there at all. Joseph left his room and froze in confusion, seemingly not understanding what was happening. But I really didn't understand anything. After all, I saw this strange scene with my own eyes, and I could not understand my mother. Why didn't she do anything about it? I spent all day with Alice to make sure she would not cry anymore. After this incident, Dad, or maybe I should call him Father, became even more distant from us. As his oldest daughter, I felt some responsibility for what was happening in our family. In order to somehow draw his attention to the situation, I went to the business center where my father worked. I did not warn him, I just simply waited for him in the parking lot. And then I suddenly discovered that I was not alone in this parking lot waiting for my father. There was a woman who wore large sunglasses. So I did not immediately realize that it was the heroine of the story that I had almost forgotten about. My father walked up to her, hugged her around the waist, and they kissed. I was hiding behind a column, but I saw everything. I was terribly angry, and then acted before I thought about what I was doing. I jumped out of my hiding spot and ran up to the sweet couple, pushed the woman away, and started yelling at my father. He was very surprised to see me, but quickly got himself together. My father grabbed my shoulders and shook me lightly. It worked in that I came to my senses. After making sure that my aggression was over, my father's mistress approached us, and I was finally able to take a closer look at her face. Now I recognized her even before my father told me her name. It was Frances. She was obviously older, but that unpleasant smile was still there. And then my father told me the truth. After I found his notes and asked him to tell me the story of their love, my father could not stop thinking about Frances even though so many years had passed. He decided to find her. It wasn't that difficult on the internet because Frances never got married and kept her maiden name. My father contacted her. It turned out that a couple of years ago, Frances had returned to the United States because her father had died and left her his house, so she just stayed there. He met with her, and again, they picked up where they left off, romantically. Looking ahead, I will say that I understand that 2 of my actions resulted in the collapse of my family. First, I pulled out the story with Frances, which after resurrecting it, my father found her and made her his mistress. And now, when, because of me, their relationship was no longer a secret, he decided that he did not need to hide anymore. He asked my mother for a divorce, left us, and now lives with Frances in her house. This is the end of my story. My father betrayed his family and me, and all because I did not curb my curiosity in time.
My name is Jemmy, and I'm 16 years old. My story begins 2 years ago when my parents and I migrated from our country to find a better life in the U.S. We were very poor. We had no means of comfortable survival and no hope for a change. So we decided to change our circumstances instead. There was no way we could afford the cost and bear with the long process of legal means of living in the United States. So we did what others had done. We became illegal immigrants. Oh, don't be so shocked. We're not bad people. I know it's wrong. I mean, it's called illegal for a reason. I am aware that it's not what we should have done, but this was crucial in our case. We didn't know what else to do. It was either this or stay home and die of starvation. We chose the better option, and for a while, it all worked. We lived simple lives. Mama and I worked as maids. Papa, on the other hand, took whatever job he could get. We knew how dangerous it was to get exposed and did everything to blend in. We were managing like that until one day we heard on the TV some news that later became our worst nightmare. The government was taking new and extreme measures to deport illegal immigrants. This put our entire lives in jeopardy. The daily deportations were increasing rapidly. Hundreds of illegal immigrants were being found. We couldn't risk getting caught because there was nothing, absolutely nothing, waiting for us back home. My parents panicked, not knowing what to do. We'd been hiding for long as illegal immigrants, and we knew that we'd most likely get deported. In the rush of things, an idea popped into my head that I knew could save the whole situation. The thing is, it was too extreme. I thought about it a lot, and eventually, I decided to do it. In one of the houses where I worked, I met a boy who I ended up falling in love with. He was the son of the household, rich, handsome, and somehow we dated. Of course, it was a strange relationship we always had to hide. We'd never let our parents know of this. They would only worry. Now, when this problem of deportation arose, I knew Josh, my boyfriend, was the only person who could help me. He was American and from a wealthy and powerful family. I knew he loved me, and I thought of him at most times as my future partner. So, maybe, if things got more official between us, the chances of us staying in the U.S. would rise. Now, I'm not talking about marriage. I wish that would work. Well, I could ask him to marry me, but I wasn't sure if that would be legal at my age, and his parents would definitely not approve. It was going to be a long, long story. So instead, I came up with an idea that was more doable. I wanted to get pregnant. Surely Josh would stay by my side. He wouldn't let me do this alone. And if that was the case, he'd make sure no one would take away his beloved girlfriend and baby. Even his parents would accept us when a baby is involved. My plan seemed just perfect. Getting pregnant was the easy part. I read online all about it, and I followed the instructions. I waited for the right time of the month, and I got with Josh. Of course, he thought I was on the pill because I answered with yes every time he asked. It didn't work the first time, so I kept trying. Until one day, the pregnancy test showed positive for pregnancy. Even though things were working according to my plan, when I saw the results, I froze in my place. Was I really pregnant? Seeing the results in my own eyes made everything feel so real. Days after, I went to Josh and told him about the pregnancy. His cold reaction was very confusing and humiliating for me. As if he couldn't understand my words, he said, "What did you say?" I repeated my words and showed him the pregnancy test. Truthfully, I expected Josh to smile widely and say, "Oh my God, But no, at that moment and right before my eyes, his face became like a mask of anger. He blamed me for not using protection properly and said I should not even think of telling anyone anything, and even if I did, he would deny it anyway. Our relationship had always been in secret, so no one would bear witness. I cried, begging him, but he didn't listen. The next day, I was fired. So there I was, one pregnant, jobless, illegal immigrant. I realized that instead of solving our problems, I had made it even worse. I had no choice now. I had to tell my parents. I imagined how they would react. Mama was a Christian. Dad was a peaceful man. Still, as his daughter, I knew he would be a scary disciplinarian when the situation arose. But I had to tell them anyway. Papa and Mama sat in the living room, tired as they looked at me. I saw how much strain they were under, and my heart broke all over again. The stress and worry of deportation were killing them, and I knew I was about to make it all worse. When I finally told them the truth, they were indeed shocked. Mama looked at Papa. They both looked at me. There was an uncomfortable silence as I waited for their reaction. When the silence became too much, I began to shakily explain that the reason I even considered getting pregnant at first was that I wanted to help. I cried and asked them to forgive me. I told them that the plan backfired and my boyfriend didn't want to help. My mother wrapped her arms around my shoulder while crying, and Papa put his hand on my knee, a tear running down his cheeks. Seriously, I was confused. What was going on? My Papa crying instead of giving me the talk of my life? They were silent for a little while, but then I asked them what I was going to do with the baby. Papa said I should keep it, that it might even be better that way. What? How could they say that? It was true that I got pregnant to help them, but it was obvious that I did a horrible mistake. I sacrificed my whole life ahead of me, even though I had practically volunteered. How could they think of sacrificing me easily like that? Days went by, and I couldn't speak to them. I felt betrayed by my own parents. How could they tell me to keep the baby and destroy my life? How could they not worry after they heard all I'd been through? So I went ahead and told my mom that I've decided to get an abortion, whether she wants to help me through it or not. My mom seemed upset with my decision, but she didn't argue and assured me that she'll help. The next day, she assisted me with setting an appointment at the clinic, and it felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. Regardless of that, my connection with my parents didn't improve, and they only seemed to be feeling sadder with each passing day. A day prior to my appointment, I woke up to find the house empty. I called my parents, but no one answered. It was strange because it wasn't like them to just leave and not say anything. I also tried to call them, but they didn't answer. I started to worry, but I didn't give it much thought. However, when a few hours passed by and they still were absent, I started to seriously worry. Could they be troubled with the police or get held by the authorities? All kinds of thoughts were racing through my mind, and I was panicking. I went to my parents' room trying to find anything that could give me a clue as to what was going on. And boom, here it was, a letter on my mom's desk that said, "Notice to appear" on it. I didn't understand what it meant exactly, so I started reading. The letter was from the government. It was an order for us to appear at court to review our resident status. My heart dropped. Even though we were expecting this, it never really hit me until I saw that letter. I looked at the date set for court, and it was for today. I freaked out. I had no idea what to do. My parents were probably getting an order of deportation at the moment. I had to act fast. Without thinking, I headed out to Josh's place. He was the only person who could help me. When Josh saw me, he was confused. He asked what's wrong. As I was trying to explain to him what had happened, I almost fainted. Josh held me and said that I should relax and tell him what happened. When I did, Josh quickly called his father and asked him what should be done. After several phone calls, Josh said that everything will be taken care of, and together, we headed to court. It was crazy how much power Josh's family had, because when I got there, my parents' trial was delayed for some hours, and they were sitting in the discussion room with a fancy lawyer. When I got there, the lawyer asked me if I was planning to continue with my pregnancy. I looked at my parents and I didn't know how to answer that. The lawyer continued to explain that if my answer was yes, it would help his case very much and we most likely won't get deported. And if not? I asked. The lawyer answered quietly, then the chances of staying here won't be that high. My mom lowered her head and told me that they apologized if I felt pressured about the baby, and told me that they didn't tell me about the notice because they didn't want this to affect the decision I make about my pregnancy. My dad then said that they would never think of sacrificing their own daughter. Seeing him crying was unexpected. He said that there are some things that I don't know about. Problems with dangerous family members were only one of the reasons we had to change locations. If we were to go back to our home country, we could be in real danger. It had been pretty ugly and they tried to shield me from it all. I was surprised to hear that going back to our country was going to be life-threatening. Dealing with all of this was really hard and complicated. But the reality was that I had a baby on the way, and it could be the only reason to keep us going. I want to keep the baby, I said. My mom had tears in her eyes. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure more than anything that I never want to see my family in danger. I never thought it was possible, but now, 8 months later, I am at peace. Even though Josh didn't want to be a part of the baby's life, I did really well with the help of my parents. The baby girl is already knocking and would be out anytime soon. For the life of me, I can't even believe I once tried to abort this sweet angel. Yes, that's her name, Angel. And she is a constant source of joy to me. My parents were never deported and were granted residence because I was carrying an American child. And I also was underage. So my parents were given permission to stay with me, thanks to Josh's parents' lawyer. I don't know what the future holds and what we will do, but we're trying our best to keep going as a solid family. This was a terrible experience, but still, I am thankful for it. It is the reason I have my angel. So what did you think of this story? Do you know anyone who's been in a similar situation? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to